Thanks everybody for joining. I'm not going to go too much into slides here. Dan and I have a pretty condensed PowerPoint presentation. However, I want this to be interactive because it is a solution that's not very popular in the channel. Admittedly, I used to be in the space many years ago selling virtual desktop or VDI. Raise some hands if you guys have heard of VDI, RDP. I'm hoping. Heard a few. I'm assuming more, hopefully. I think with VDI and virtual desktop, back then, it was taking off, right? You've got applications moving to the cloud. You've got servers moving to the cloud. Everything's cloud-based. It was only inevitable that the whole desktop itself would move to the cloud as well. It attempted, but there were hiccups. There were hiccups with UCaaS solutions. That was the biggest hang-up in the channel. UCaaS is a big monster in the channel, and if UCaaS doesn't work well, then VDI wouldn't take off. Fast forward to about 9 months ago. Microsoft Azure re-released VDI as AVD and incorporated a technology called WebRTC. And so now we do have a fix for that. In most cases, I'm not going to say every provider is covered here, but in most cases that hiccup is gone. And so now with the migration to cloud, you're seeing desktops go, and I'll talk a little bit more about why. But before I get into that, you have the clicker?
Yeah.
I'll talk about Ericsson. So as Dan had mentioned, we're a small little company based out of Stockholm, Sweden. $28 billion in revenue. I say we went behind the scenes there for a little while because now the company is known for being a 5G provider, right? So about 60 to 70% of the world's 5G market that's leased by T-Mobile, Verizon, Sprint, etc., is actually using Ericsson infrastructure. Fast forward to about 3 years ago, Ericsson acquired Cradlepoint. I'm assuming a lot of you know who Cradlepoint is. A lot of people don't know that Ericsson owns Cradlepoint. And the reason that's important, I'm hoping there's no AT&T people in here, we're not going to AT&T it, right? We're not going to sync are there AT&T people in here? All right, good. All right. We're not going to sink our claws into it and create division with the company or the right hand not knowing what the left hand's doing. Although AT&T is great at what they do, there's some challenges there, right? So Cradlepoint continues to run their own, and as I emphasize that, they had their biggest sales quarter last year, or biggest sales year last year. So they're running great. About a month ago or 2 months ago, you guys may have heard this, we acquired Vonage for $6.2 billion cash. What you're seeing happening here is Ericsson's using that 5G network, which will eventually and undoubtedly replace last mile providers at some point, and they're latching onto it because now you've got a Cradlepoint device that broadcasts that 5G signal, and at some point 6G. You've got Vonage, not for voice. Vonage is actually known for now the CPaaS market, their communications platform as a service, and their open API integration. And that's where Ericsson will be using them. However, our division, get to the next slide, is focused on one thing and one thing only. I don't sell Cradlepoint, I don't sell Vonage. I only sell desktop as a service, which is the new version of VDI. So now I can take any device, any laptop, any iPad, I can launch an app called Remote Desktop, and all of a sudden I have a desktop right there on my iPhone, right there on my iPad. So if I'm a remote worker now, I don't have to give you a laptop anymore. You guys remember when years ago when you joined a company, they gave you a cell phone. They quickly moved to BYOD, bring your own device. That's what's happening with laptops now. You don't have to wait for supply chain issues. You don't have to worry about getting laptops back from call center employees. You don't have to worry about a salesperson leaving and not returning their laptop. It's a simple click of a button to disable that user. Or you can do so through Active Directory, which we'll get into the technical aspect of that a little bit more. But what we provide here is completely based on Azure. Azure, obviously, is the Microsoft Cloud division. Azure has invested over $1 billion last year just in its security and is easily the fastest growing cloud provider. So this is no knock on anyone else that provides virtual desktop, but historically it's been built on Citrix and VMware. With Azure, you can leverage your Microsoft licensing. Most companies have E3 or E5 Microsoft licensing. That gives you ability to build into Azure. And what I'm finding out since joining Ericsson about in April, a lot of my I came from the UCaaS space prior to this. A lot of my clients that were selling UCaaS and soft phones and selling fiber circuits, they would come to me and say, hey, Mo, I need direct route into Azure. I'm going back to those same people and saying, hey, Ben, what were you using that direct route for? I never asked my client. It's really that simple. Ask that one question. What are you using that direct route for into Azure? And what we're finding out is they're already doing virtual desktop and they're struggling. They're bringing in managed service providers who do help, but you got to think, if you're rolling out AVD or Azure Virtual Desktop, you need a whole help desk to support it. It's not easy because it's a move to you supporting someone else's laptop working from home on a Comcast internet connection. Hope there's no Comcast people here. But so, you may deal with some bandwidth issues. We support and fully manage everything. We leverage your Microsoft licensing. And now, rather than getting single-digit points from Microsoft, we're channel friendly. We pay that directly to Telecom. Next slide. So I had mentioned Citrix, VMware. Those were the popular and still are the popular virtual desktop providers. The reason we settled with Azure and partnered with Azure, I shouldn't say settled, we partnered with Azure is because of the vast footprint and the fact that they've got 220 data centers. When I worked for QTS, when I worked for Telex, when I worked for TierPoint, and we rolled out VDI, we would roll out a stack of hardware, we'd install VMware on it, and we put it in 56 Marietta, we put it into the Miami NAP, we put it in California, and then we build a path for users at their office to connect back to that. Well, now in the day and age of COVID and outsourced call centers, what am I going to do when I've got somebody here in Asia Pac, connecting all the way back to Atlanta or Miami? I have to take that same stack of hardware, partner up with a Manila data center, and co-locate it there. You don't do that anymore. I've got 220 data centers at my disposal that I can spin up like this. So Ericsson specifically partnered up with Microsoft, not only because they've become the fastest growing cloud provider, not only because of their vast footprint, but because of the security that comes with the E3, E5 licensing, and the adoption of Microsoft itself. Next slide. So, as partners, and Dan and I just left a cloud academy yesterday, and it was really all about training partners on how to sell desktop as a service. You don't have to get into the speeds and fees. This is what Dan and I do. We've got people all over the country, all over the world that can help with that. Really, what you're looking for is business challenges. And my favorite question to ask is, how are you handling security in the day of remote working? That's a huge issue. Do you guys remember the Home Depot breach a few years ago? That happened because somebody was at a coffee shop, left their laptop there, and walked away. You steal that laptop, you've got all that data. Not anymore. You can now tell your users, hey, bring your own laptop, or I'll give you $200 to buy a cheap, crappy Chromebook or an HP Stream, download Remote Desktop, and once you launch Remote Desktop, you'll have the company desktop. You can't stick in a USB drive to upload anything. You can't stick in a USB drive to download anything. Everything you save goes to OneDrive. Your whole experience is completely controlled by the company at that point. So it's far more secure than anybody working from home on a company-issued laptop. And you're taking away the human factor, right? If my laptop gets stolen, I'll log in the portal, hit the deactivate button, and you're done. So those are some of the questions you can ask, right? How are you guys handling security in the day of remote working? How are supply chain issues with laptops? I assure you, a lot of people aren't asking those questions. I assure you that's a huge pain. Dan and I talk to these clients every day, right? So what feedback is, typically feedback is, oh, UCaaS doesn't run well with virtual desktop. I talked about that. We can dig into that a little bit more if you guys would like to, but I'll just show a demo. It's also your opportunity as a technology consultant or partner to then leverage that Microsoft licensing as well. Because if they're already a Microsoft shop and they've got that E3 or E5, they're most likely using Teams as well. You might as well voice-enable Teams. It runs flawlessly in virtual desktop. We were at the Telecom Summit in Utah. We're on a hotspot running 5 meg connection, 5 megs. I launched my virtual desktop. I'm automatically getting a gig. And we'll show you that demo in just a second. I'm automatically getting a gig. No matter where, as long as I have a 2 to 5 meg connection, once I launch a virtual desktop, I'm going to get a gig or near a gig. I was running a Teams video call over that 5 meg connection in Utah. So that challenge of bandwidth, that challenge of voice not working, that's not there anymore. Next slide, Dan. So I'm going to pass it to Dan here. Dan's on the engineering team and kind of talks about the fact that you can set this up on your own. Again, that E3, E5 licensing includes access to AVD, or Azure Virtual Desktop. If you talk to anybody that's done it, it's a little bit of work. You may need to hire somebody that can help do it, but once they've done it, they've set it up, it's not that challenging. The challenging part is managing it and supporting it, and that's where we come in.
Thanks. So just kind of going through the obvious things here, you know, it's too expensive, it's too complex, software licensing, things like that. We have met a lot of partners that have set it up on their own, and it can be done. There's a learning curve there, but what we have found with partners doing that is the ongoing support is where they really break down. Is keeping up with the apps. That's really the biggest thing. Managing the apps and managing, if you have any number of users, you know, over 10 users, it's a problem. So that's really what we do is we not only set it up for the customer, we manage it. I'm going to show you that in a minute, but the biggest thing is the ongoing support for the users, tier 1 through tier 3. While I'm talking about that, if you guys have an MSP that is managing, or if you are an MSP and you're doing tier 1 help desk for the customer, we'll gladly do tier 2, tier 3 if you want to, you know, take the first calls and determine if it is the desktop or if it's something else, that sort of thing.
Yeah, to that point, we do partner up with a lot of MSPs. That's kind of become our sweet spot lately.
Yeah, we should talk a little bit more about that as well, because the whole process is typically migrating everything to Azure. I think that was where Mo was going with the guys previous is, you know, that's something that we typically don't do. Once the data and everything's up in Azure, then we can set up the desktop and everything. So we'd like to work with MSPs that are already doing that kind of work.
I think that's a very important point. So what Dan had mentioned, if a company is moving their virtual machines, their servers or applications to Azure, and most are, the statistics show it. So if you have a client that already is using Azure, the virtual desktop that we build goes directly into their tenant. So it's just right back to where, imagine having everything in one building again, except with a extremely secure network now in Microsoft Azure managing your whole on-prem data center, except it's all in the cloud. So if you do have Azure users, which I assure you most of you probably know some people that do, this fits right into their tenant, right into their virtual machines, right into their ecosystem.
And that's obviously the ideal configuration, but we do run into customers that have apps that they do want to keep on-prem, or they have it in a colo, that sort of thing. We can set up a VPN to get to those apps and still run the virtual desktop. So it's not just for customers that put everything in Azure. So this slide is just showing all the steps that it takes to set it up. And again, like I said, there's quite a learning curve, and just to get it set up. But the biggest issue is management, ongoing management. And this slide covers what we do. So all of the items in green are all the things that we manage. So we completely manage the desktop from end to end, including this. We typically use the Microsoft Security Stack, but some customers want to use different things, a different MFA or a different endpoint protection. We'll be happy to do that, to use that particular product if that's what they want to use. So it kind of brings up another thing. So one of the ways that we typically go to market is we'll work with a customer, we do the proposal, and then we will typically do a POC, a 30-day POC. And what that does is if they are using some different MFA or different whatever it might be, or the applications, all that kind of comes out in the POC. And the way we do it is we have them sign the contract for whatever the term is, typically 3 years. We do the 30-day POC. If it doesn't work, they can get out. Obviously, if it does, then they move forward with the contract, because obviously we want them to have skin in the game as well as us.
And that's a huge investment on our part, right? We're having these calls with these clients. And again, feel free to call us, and if you want a personal demo, we can provide a personal demo. We can hop on a discovery call. But if we're setting this up, we're going through a pretty thorough process, right? We're running a script on their computers, looking at what applications their at-home workers use, what applications the executives use, and we're building what's called a golden image of those applications or that desktop, where they simply go into our portal and say, hey, I'm hiring somebody on Monday. Select the name of the user, the location, the image they want to use, and they're up and running. So we'll set up that portal. So we go through a long process to even get them there, and then we're so confident that they'll be happy with the service that we'll give you the 30-day out, which would obviously be, put us in the red for that deal.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, we build a production image. So it's not like we're just building a prototype. We build a production image, and if it works, then they move forward and just add additional users to it. And we can integrate with their Azure AD or on-prem, however, we need to do it. That's easy. So we do backup DR for the entire desktop, media optimization, which Mo talked a little bit about before. We use, so what's deployed today is WebRTC, which redirects the video and the media stream outside the virtual desktop and provides a much better performance in terms of voice quality. And again, managing the compute. So let's talk about the compute for a little bit. So what we typically do is we will, as Mo kind of alluded to, we'll typically build into the user's, the customer's tenant. And what we do in that is we set up all of our desktops and our VMs, but we pay for them. So we take the risk, the usage risk that the customer normally would. We give the customer a flat fee, a flat MRC.
That part's really important. If you talk to, you've probably heard the horror stories, right? People moving to AWS, moving to Azure, running their virtual machines, and all of a sudden ending up with a $1,000 bill. It's a fluctuating cost. This is all of this at one flat rate. And as Dan had alluded to, and you can talk a little bit about this, we're taking on the risk at that point.
Yeah, we take on the egress, the data egress cost risk, basically. We work in your tenant, but we are responsible for the VMs that we build in your tenant, and they're billed to us. So again, we give your customer a flat rate per user per month based on the machine size. We have various machine sizes depending on what the customer's needs are and the apps, that sort of thing. Any questions? Sorry, I've kind of been rambling on here, and I just wanted to stop.
How long have you guys been doing this?
So Ericsson, you want to go ahead and unlock your computer so we can show them the speed test?
Sure.
Ericsson acquired a company called Stratusworks out of California about 2.5 years ago. We were running virtual desktop then. Then Microsoft changed, I won't say everything, but changed a lot of their back-end engines on how virtual desktop or RDP was deployed, and they rebranded it as AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop. So we relaunched that AVD product with our portal about 9 months ago, which it's the same technology, but the branding of the portal and the way everything tied in, we had to revamp. Luckily, with Ericsson owning us, we kind of got rich parents, so we're quick to make that happen. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned before you have some people that like to keep some apps on premises, right? Even though they move some things to the door. Do you have hybrid setups where you have some people with virtual machines in both places and the domain is extended?
Exactly. Yep. We're able to customize that way, and I think that's really important because of the fact that we're not. Again, we're almost a startup within a huge organization. We're about 100 people, right? So I can set up custom configs, but that sort of hybrid setup, that I wouldn't really even consider a custom config. We can build out to where if you have a print server on premise, if you have a file server in AWS, we can connect to all of that. In an ideal scenario or a clean scenario for any company, they would have everything with Azure. But we can work with Google, we can work with AWS, we can work with on-prem.
Is there a minimum, or what's that cost-wise?
Currently, there's no minimum. That I'm assuming that's going to change. We're picking up a lot of steam, especially so Ericsson after acquiring Stratusworks. Stratusworks wasn't very well known in the channel except with Telaris on the West Coast, so it didn't really give us the traction we wanted. They hired me. They hired a few other channel managers that were here in the Southeast, and then I think the acquisition of Vonage really springboarded us getting into the channel even heavier. So at some point, I would think we're going to introduce a minimum, but today there is no minimum. If you want me to set up one desktop, I can set up one desktop. I'd rather not. I'd rather at least do 5 or 10. And cost-wise, you're looking at anywhere between 55-ish, depending on scale. I can get competitive, all the way up to about $150 per user per month. However, I can tell you this, I haven't lost a deal on price yet.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yep.
Thank you.
So I just want to mention, so talking about higher priced VMs, there's different types of VMs. There's pooled and dedicated, and sometimes there's a need for dedicated VMs at a very high compute capacity, and it's for situations like AutoCAD. And this is a perfect example for this application. You have users that are working remote, and they're working on huge files, and then they want to collaborate with another engineer. What do they have to do? They have to send the file somewhere. Well, that's is a problem with low bandwidth. In this situation, they're not only not sending, the file doesn't go anywhere, because remember, with this situation, all the data stays in Azure or whatever server it's on. And the data never comes down to the desktop. Nothing comes down to the desktop but screen refreshes and mouse clicks. Exactly. That's the whole beauty of the concept in general. So the other user just logs in and starts working on that same file. So it makes collaboration much easier. Yeah. But getting back to the power, the compute power needed, typically that type of user would have a very expensive desktop or laptop, like in the $4,000 or $5,000 range. Now today they can do it with any computer. They can do it on an iPad, that kind of a thing.
Yep.
So that's another big advantage.
So we're on Dan's iPad hotspot right now. We're getting, wow, all right, it's a lot better than I thought. All right, we should use the Wi-Fi. I was hoping we were gonna get 5 or 10 megs, all right? Because yeah.
Well, the upload will be okay.
Damn engineers. All right, so. No, you're fine, but let's just pretend I've got 5 or 10 megs here, right? I typically like to. All right, Dan.
Sorry. I'll throttle it down next time.
Yeah, throttle it down this time. All right, but you're seeing my upload's pretty weak, right? Now, if I'm an engineer running AutoCAD, which a lot of our clients are, and by the way, this is important for partners to know, remote working, if they're running Azure, I assure you they're getting bombarded by Microsoft about Azure Virtual Desktop. So if you're not having that conversation, you're missing out on potential revenue there. It's definitely happening. The second biggest takers of our service are really contractors, because you want to be able to spin them up, spin them down immediately when they're done with the project, and they can bring their own device, so you don't have to worry about supply chain issues. Thirdly, our call centers. Getting a laptop back from somebody international that's a call center employee in an industry that's pretty high turnover.
Forget about it.
Yeah, right, there you go. You don't have to worry about that anymore, right? I read a statistic the other day that call center employees internationally will show up on the first day of training, they'll get their laptop, then when it's actually time to go to work, about 60 to 70% of them will show up, the rest will not. Forget about that laptop. You don't have to worry about that anymore, right? So we just ran a speed test in here. Imagine that I'm an engineer running AutoCAD, right? I'm drawing out these big, huge files, running Revit, running AutoCAD of huge buildings. I'm talking huge files. Typically today, in standard setup, if I'm working from home and I try to upload it, it's going to take forever, especially over a VPN connection. I'm going to set it up at dinner, even with Dan's mammoth, for no reason, hotspot speeds here. It would take me forever to upload this document. Like I'd run it before dinner, after dinner it might go. Sometimes if there's a blip in the internet, it doesn't transfer at all. The reason they find this solution so powerful is I can run that same speed test in a virtual desktop, and I'm getting typically around a gig.
So
Go ahead.
So think about SaaS solutions that you have to run over the internet one way or the other. Now you're running out of a data center and you're getting a gig symmetrical. Typically, this actually is low.
Yeah,
we
it's
usually
kinda slow.
we usually get a little higher than this. So it makes it nice, right? Because you're working out of a data center and it's redundant. It's never going to go down.
So typically, I don't like to pitch this as a bandwidth driver, but I was talking to Todd at TeleAdvocate this morning, right? He's going out to a site that's in rural Florida where they're waiting for fiber build. All they can get out there is cellular signal. So he ran a T-Mobile hotspot this morning. He just texted me right before this. He ran this. They're getting a gig now on this desktop.
I got a question.
Sure.
This is your back end in your data center. This is not going back to the client end.
Correct.
It's what's running on your back end. So
Correct.
And RDP is only using it's using what, 64K of bandwidth?
Exactly.
Correct.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, you're right. This is happening in the Azure data center.
right,
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah. So if I've got a user in California, I'd place their image closer to California, obviously.
Right, if you're on a satellite phone in the middle of the Atlantic and you only got 64K.
You run this, you're going to get a gig, right? Yeah. Well,
No, you're not getting it. You're getting 64K to the data center and the back end on your data center.
But remember,
Right.
the data is everything's happening in the data center. So essentially, you're getting a gig on your desktop because your desktop isn't here; it's really there.
Just paint the picture.
Yeah.
Your example from before, you said a Teams call was somehow
Yeah,
influenced by that.
Yeah,
the guy's not gonna get a good experience on a streaming media like a Teams call.
you actually, well, maybe not on the example of the ship with 64K, right?
Yeah.
But if you've got 2 to 5 megs, you can run a video call. I can run a video call here in the demo here, but we're getting 200 megs, so obviously that's not really the punch. But at the Telar Summit, it was 10 megs.
Yeah, but if you have bad latency, then
Yes,
But-
well, 64K, yeah, or 2 to 5 megs, because you got to think, and I think you already get it. Your bandwidth at 2 to 5 megs, that I keep referencing, up to 10 megs, is really just being used for mouse clicks and screen refreshes. So your experience there, if you've only got 2 megs, it may be a little their voice. It may look like a voiceover, right? But once you hit around 5 to 10 megs, you can do it. You can provide it. You can have a video call.
So you're going to get the same performance that you would outside the virtual desktop and that's the solution that's been come up with. The problem before was with VDI, you weren't getting that same. You were getting a terrible call quality. You were getting jitter and things like that because of all the hops and the distance. Whereas now the media stream goes from the desktop to the other party, basically wherever you're calling. So it takes the shortest path. That's
Right.
that's
Are you saying that the VDI protocol, the newer protocol on the virtual desktop is actually managing the audio and video stream better than the old VDI?
100%.
That's really what it comes down to.
right.
100%.
It redirects it outside. It uses the
WebRTC.
endpoint to send it directly to the other end, so that only the media stream, the control data, just kind of like in an old PRI with the D channels and B channels, where they're separated. That's what happens. It separates it. So the media stream goes outside of the virtual desktop, and that's how they solved it. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so where before a call center user using VDI would be on their virtual desktop, performing all their tasks, but if they need to make a UCAS or a soft phone call, they go back to their local desktop.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that anymore, because with the new version of AVD or Azure Virtual Desktop, the virtual desktop will utilize your local resources by default. So you don't never have to come out of that screen.
Now we do. Now we
What's
do
that?
have to make a disclaimer. It's not done for every UCAS today, right? So we know for sure Teams. We know for sure Zoom.
Ring.
We're pretty confident about Ring, but those are the only ones that we know of right now.
What other questions? All right, guys. Well, if you'd like to learn more, Dan's here local. I'm in Atlanta. We've got people everywhere. I can always hop on a call. I'm out here pretty often. So if you guys do want any sort of demos, any sort of client meetings, a lunch and learn, just give me a reason.
What are the industries again that are more prone to do this, by the way? Like where,
Great question. So remote working is the layup, right? That's the simple one. But you're looking for companies that are big on security. You're looking for companies with lots of contractors. You're looking for companies with a lot of engineers because of the type of AutoCAD and Revit files they're using. And then call centers. BPOs and call centers are taking off right now.
Really, anybody who's had issues maintaining their, laptops remotely,
Yep.
which is pretty much all of your customers, right? I mean, I don't know why this hasn't taken off sooner. It's kind of like
It's the UCAS
what
thing.
happened. Yeah, it's kind of like UCAS. Why did it take so many years?
It's-
When it was such an obvious solution. The same thing with this. I think it's going to start taking off now.
It's all right. I mean, we're seeing it pick up significantly. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.